Are you ready for your training, future secret agents? It's time to learn how to think like a spy.
Imagine that you are a declared intelligence officer in a foreign country. Now, by declared, I mean that people in the local government know that you are a spy. And in many instances, they put you under surveillance just to ensure that you're not doing anything that would be considered detrimental to their nation. But being the resourceful intelligence operative that you are, you have arranged to have a secret meeting with the foreign minister of that country tonight in your car. Keep in mind that if this foreign minister is seen with you, he will no doubt be fired from his position. And considering that this country is governed by a harsh dictator, being fired would be the very least of his problems. For you, being caught with him could mean some jail time, could mean getting kicked out of the country, something known as being PNG'd or persona non grata, as well as the possibility of causing an international incident between your two nations in the media. All in all, you definitely cannot get caught with this man in your car. So, there you two are. The meeting is going well. The minister is providing with some very sensitive intelligence about the intentions of the dictator, when suddenly the minister suffers a heart attack. He's clutching his chest in front of you. Here's your question. You are 1 mile from anything you choose. What are you gonna do? Sound like a ridiculous scenario? Believe it or not, this was just one of the questions that I had to answer when I applied to the CIA back in the 1990s. It's a lot different from your standard job interviews today that ask, so why do you think you'd be a good fit for Dunder Mifflin? The point is, the CIA wanted to know if I could actually think like a spy. We'll come back to our scenario at the end of today's talk. But for now, let's discuss why we're even here. Welcome to CARVERCON, the premier conference based upon the CIA's Carver target analysis and vulnerability assessment methodology. Our theme this year is the Carver mindset, how to think like a spy. My name is Luke Bensi, the founder of Security Management International. And for more than 2 decades, I've had the unique privilege to travel and work for the intelligence community in over 100 countries. During that time, I was able to learn from some of the CIA's most outstanding case officers, intel analysts, and technical operations people, as well as liaison with some of the world's most interesting and devious kings, sheiks, warlords, and dictators. I've trained hundreds of foreign intelligence officers, worked in a handful of war zones, and been through 2 African coups. A large portion of my job included conducting threat and vulnerability assessments of critical infrastructure, as well as identifying threats and vulnerabilities in people. In short, I spent a lot of time utilizing the Carver methodology. If you're not familiar with the Carver methodology, by now you're probably wondering, hey, what the heck is this Carver thing all about? Why is there a conference devoted to it? And how in the world will it help me think like a spy? Well, for those of you not yet versed in this valuable tool, allow me to provide you with a brief 30,000-foot overview. In its simplest definition, the Carver target analysis and vulnerability assessment methodology is a system that uses specific procedures, both qualitative and quantitative in nature, to interpret and determine a probability of attack by an adversary against critical assets and/or key resources. With its origins dating back to the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, the methodology can be both offensive and defensive, meaning it can be used to identify an adversary's weaknesses or your own. An offensive assessment against a target is typically conducted covertly. This would be considered a target analysis. It involves clandestinely collecting intelligence against the target for use in a subsequent attack or sabotage operations. Our special operations and intelligence communities have traditionally employed it in this way. Now, defending a target requires a vulnerability assessment. This includes an honest evaluation of the weaknesses of the facility, system, or even a person. We typically perform a vulnerability assessment to ensure that all potential weaknesses have been identified and mitigating actions have been taken. Following the attacks of September 11, 2001, Carver entered the realm of the private sector as Fortune 500 security directors began using the methodology to protect their organization's assets and systems. Now, Carver is an acronym. It stands for criticality, identifying critical systems, single points of failure or choke points; accessibility, determining ease of access to critical systems, operations, or assets; recoverability, the time and effort taken to overcome an adverse event; vulnerability, security systems effectiveness versus an adversary's capability; effect, the scope and magnitude of adverse consequences resulting from malicious actions and responses to them; and finally, recognizability, evaluating the likelihood that potential adversaries would recognize assets as critical or valuable targets. In today's global environment, Carver has been pushed to the forefront of the security industry and has been instrumental in the defensive methodology for the protection of the U.S. homeland. In addition to providing a numeric score for the probability of attack from an adversary, Carver also measures the effectiveness of a facility's security posture. It allows for standardization of security measures. It helps allocate and justify security budgets. It offers design-basis threat scenarios for emergency preparedness and crisis management training. And it outlines a threat spectrum between the likelihood and impact of an attack. It also identifies and prioritizes key assets. And finally, it analyzes estimated recovery times after a terror incident. One of the key elements of the Carver methodology is the use of what's called an asset numeric scoring system. It's used to identify and evaluate assets based on the 6 Carver criteria, with a score ranging anywhere from between 6 and 30. 30 out of 30 representing a highly vulnerable, high probability of attack. Not only can Carver be used to assess physical assets, but it's equally useful to assess people and even cyber infrastructure. Once a comprehensive Carver target analysis and vulnerability assessment has been completed and material risks and threats have been identified, intelligence professionals then determine the best approach to eliminate, thwart, and offset vulnerabilities. And they recommend appropriate security systems, protocols, and countermeasures. Now, that's about as simple as I can explain the Carver methodology. SMI, along with our partner, the USF Office of Corporate Training and Professional Education, offer a certified course in Carver that can be completed either online or as a more comprehensive week-long in-person course. If you would like more details, click on the link in the description. In the meantime, let's now discuss what it means to think like a spy. There's a lot of misconceptions about what an intelligence officer actually does, and we can thank Hollywood for that. If I say the word spy, it may conjure up images of a suave secret agent playing baccarat against a notorious arms dealer in Monte Carlo. For others, it could be the stereotypical war zone guy dressed in cargo pants with the neck scarf and boots, ready to fight the global war on terrorism. Finally, for some, it has something to do with trench coats and fedoras. This getup I haven't worn before, but the other two, yes. Now, there's an old joke at the CIA that states, you come in believing you're going to be James Bond, and in truth, you end up more like Miss Moneypenny. This is a reference to the amount of time that intelligence officers spend behind their desks typing away on their keyboards. Copious reading and writing skills are essential elements of the intelligence officer's job description. Sadly, the movies never portray James Bond or Jason Bourne writing up their intel reports in their less than glamorous government cubicles. That wouldn't be sexy. What is sexy is the field work. And that's where good old-fashioned street smarts, coupled with extensive training known as tradecraft, is at the heart of thinking like a spy. Now, it's been said that the average person makes upwards of 35,000 decisions per day. This can include deciding what to wear, whether or not to have a second cup of coffee, what articles to read in your newsfeed. You get the idea. While most of these are not life or death judgments, the majority of us have become pretty adept at making decisions as easily as we breathe. But what if your decisions suddenly took on a greater importance? What if you had to observe the world and everyday situations through a completely different lens? What if the assessments you made today could actually influence the outcome of the world events tomorrow? Welcome to what spies refer to as the intelligence mindset, or what I like to call the Carver mindset. The Carver mindset is a way of thinking about the world around you, which asks you to internally take on several personality traits at once. Consider it like playing a combination of professions. You need to be equal parts detective, skeptic, statistician, chess player, poker player, psychiatrist, actor, and even at times, magician. You must learn to become a chameleon, someone who can ask a smart question and then sit quietly and listen, just as efficiently as you can persuade someone to trust you or to influence their beliefs. The Carver mindset is a way of problem solving based upon getting outside of a problem and then asking yourself a unique set of questions about it. Now, Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman used to claim the biggest impediment to understanding the world as it is the insistence that we already know what it is. When it comes to geopolitical affairs, this statement could not be more relevant. The primary function of the CIA is to provide intelligence to the President of the United States in order for him to make better informed decisions. Therefore, the President is always in need of knowing what other world leaders, particularly adversaries, are thinking. But this information is very hard to come by, and it's seldom accurate. Therefore, sticking with the example of insisting we know how the world already works, Feynman would frequently cite a game his father taught him as a child. Sitting around the dinner table, Feynman's dad would ask, suppose we were Martians who had come to Earth, and for the first time, we were looking at things from the outside, having never seen them before. What would that be like? What would we see? Using this very rare third-person viewpoint, it led the Nobel Prize winner to get in the habit of ignoring assumptions and begin asking the following questions. What would this situation look like if I knew nothing about it at all? What assumptions, expectations, and foregone conclusions am I taking for granted? What if I remove those? And how does this situation look to a complete outsider? Using the principles of the Martian game forces us to examine problems from not just opposing, but also unknowing viewpoints. As Donald Rumsfeld famously once said, there are known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. That simply translated to the idea that risk is what remains after we think we've thought of everything else already. But I digress. You don't want to hear about physicists or gruff secretaries of defense. You are here to learn about how spies think. So let me now give you some genuine spy case studies which demonstrate how spies process information. In the 2001 espionage thriller Spy Game, there's a classic scene where Nathan Muir, a veteran CIA case officer played by Robert Redford, is training Tom Bishop, a young recruit played by Brad Pitt, in the timeless techniques of human intelligence, or HUMINT, and tradecraft. In one particular scene, the two men are on the street enjoying a cup of coffee when Muir asks Bishop, "You see that apartment building over there?" Bishop shakes his head, "Yeah." Muir then continues, "Do you know anyone who lives there?" This time, Bishop shakes his head, "No." Muir states, "Within 10 minutes, I want to see you standing on one of those balconies." The aim being that a good CIA officer can talk their way into any room on a moment's notice using their charm, wits, and powers of persuasion. It may seem like Hollywood make-believe, but this is an actual test that intel officers perform, and it was first attributed publicly to the Israeli Mossad in Viktor Ostrovsky's book, By Way of Deception. Funny, during my training, I had an instructor once tell me, "Luke, if you were able to juggle multiple girlfriends in college without them finding out about one another, anyone can do this job." I wouldn't say that was exactly in the student training manual, but the reality is there are a lot of secrets to keep in the world of espionage, and it's a constant juggling act of people. That's another reason you have to document everything. You got to be able to keep your story straight. Let me now pose another question to you. How would you assess the following scenario? This is an actual case study utilized by the intelligence community, and it was originally taught to young analysts at the old OSS. This is the B-24 Liberator. It was a workhorse of an aircraft that was used extensively by the Allies throughout Europe. Now, the red dots on the wings and fuselage are a summation of the bullet holes and fragmentation that the collective airplanes took. In other words, all the damage from all the B-24s has been grouped onto this one diagram. Therefore, what can you conclude from this picture? Take a minute now to think about it. Looking at the photo, it might be apparent that almost all the red dots were clustered on the top of the aircraft. It was if the top of the plane was painted red and the bottom painted white. Many of the conclusions frequently include the aircraft's missions are too low in altitude, resulting in the bomber taking too much enemy fire from above. The aircraft needs to be reinforced on the top. The aircraft needs to fly faster or should be escorted by fighter planes to defend it. These all seem like logical thoughts. Now, I'm going to ask the same question again, but this time I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way. Of all the planes that made it back to base, the red dots on the wings and fuselage are a summation of the bullet holes and fragmentation the collective airplanes took. Now what can you conclude from this picture? The answer should become clear as day. None of the planes that had safely returned from their missions had been shot in the belly or the underside of the wings. We could infer that perhaps the underside of the plane was where the vulnerabilities existed. The enemy could shoot at the top of the B-24 all day long and it'd keep on flying, but from underneath, the bomber was vulnerable. Much like Feynman's quote about insisting we already know the world, this example demonstrates why we need to avoid a narrow viewpoint. When it comes to problem solving, you should try to put a frame around your problem. This means asking the right questions. For example, you might want to start by asking, what is the actual problem here? Am I addressing the actual problem or only symptoms of that problem? When did the problem begin? Was there a starting point that can be traced back? Where is the problem taking place and how does it affect the situation? Who says this is even a problem at all? Does it really need to be addressed? And how big is the extent or scope of the problem? Has anyone experienced this before and what were their outcomes? Another question that I always found useful is, what is missing from this picture? For several years, I worked as part of a surveillance unit. Later in my career, I taught surveillance to military, law enforcement, and intelligence services around the globe. Now, contrary to popular belief, surveillance is not as glamorous as it appears on television or in the movies. It usually consists of long, boring stretches of inactivity, trying to avoid detection, usually by strangers, such as nosy senior citizens, rather than, the person you're actually following. Furthermore, rarely does surveillance immediately yield that smoking gun moment where the target is unknowingly engaged in a mischievous activity. I always kick back to the old Magnum PI TV series where Tom Selleck would discreetly follow criminals around Hawaii in a bright red Ferrari wearing a loud tropical shirt, and within 20 minutes of his clandestine operation, he'd catch the criminals red-handed. So surveillance in the real world, it consists of really establishing someone's pattern of life. It's meant to fill intelligence gaps. So before my teammates and I ever began our missions for the day, we would always ask two key questions. The first question we would ask is, what do we know already about this person? And then the second question would be, what do we still need to know about this person? These simple two questions can keep you on track and prevent you from starting to prematurely fill in the blanks as to why things are the way they are, simply because you feel frustrated and you want to close the case on an unknown issue. This is dangerous, and it leads to guessing. You definitely want to avoid this rookie mistake when applying what is known as causality. Now, causality means falling to the trap of making assumptions. You say to yourself, if X happened, it must be because of Y. You begin to guess, or worse, you paint a false narrative of what most likely happened or is happening based on the need to find a quick resolution. You want your hypothesis to be the solution so badly that you ignore the unknown and force square pegs into round holes. Sometimes this can work with mechanical problems, but the thinking usually fails when you try to apply it to people. It's often useful to remember the phrase that the old actor Jack Webb used to utter in every episode of the long-running 50s crime drama Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Stick to the facts at hand. Resist the urge to create a Hollywood happy ending. Now, speaking of surveillance, spies know the difference between looking at something and actually seeing something. For example, quickly read these triangles out loud. Now, read them again. Did you notice something is amiss? If you saw that the word the and the letter A are duplicated, congratulations. You just avoided causality, seeing something rather than just looking at it and making an assumption. This is vital if you're going to call yourself a trained observer. One of the biggest challenges of thinking strategically is knowing when to act and when not to act, when to say yes and when to say no. Some of us use a simple method to help determine our go, no-go actions. I call it the SPY decision-making Venn diagram. It highlights when it's appropriate to act by considering 3 overlapping circles, each representing a specific criterion. In the top left circle is the practical category. Is it reasonable for me to do this? In the top right circle features the possibility of an ROI. Will I receive a benefit or a return on investment for doing this? And the bottom circle contains the risk. Is it worth the threat level versus my vulnerability to exposure? When the 3 circles overlap, I go. Let's break it down as follows. Practical and ROI, when they overlap, equals good rewards, but it's too soon to risk it. When the practical and the risk circles overlap, it means that it's doable, but not worth the effort. When the ROI and risk overlap, it's worth the effort, but it's not that feasible at this time. Only when practical, ROI, and risk, all 3 overlap, is the mission a go. A good spy can perform the decision-making Venn diagram in his or her head. Still, it's useful to map out the process on paper, particularly when you need to present your decision to a superior officer, a station chief, or a senior intelligence official. I also recommend keeping Parkinson's Law in mind. Work will expand to fit the time allotted. If you're a spy and you have a loose deadline, chances are your work will be never-ending. So, try to schedule a dead stop for work each day. Use the remaining time for your personal life. Even James Bond employed his own, perhaps ill-advised versions of a work-life balance with his drinking, gambling, and womanizing. Here's another pop quiz for you. Let's pretend that you are in a foreign country that is known for terrorist attacks against soft targets. You have agreed to meet your contact in a public place. While it's okay to be seen in public with this person, you also don't want to highlight it. Furthermore, you want to be sure that you're not under surveillance, and you want to ensure that you're not putting yourself in danger. Keeping those things in mind, where would be the most ideal place to sit in this restaurant to hold your meeting? I'll give you 10 seconds to decide. If you guessed table A2, you would be correct. The reason being, you are close to a secondary, even tertiary exit through the kitchen or back door, and you have a good visual of most of the restaurant. Now you may say, well sure, but doesn't A1 provide an even more complete view of the restaurant? Perhaps, but what if there was a bomb that went off right outside the window? You'd be cut with glass. If you're sitting at table A2, the guy in A1 gets hit with the glass first and provides you a bit more cover. Okay, whether you agree with me or not, here's a bonus question for you. Let's say you were having dinner with your asset and an old friend suddenly walks through the front door of the restaurant. He sees you and begins walking towards your table excitedly. What do? If you said immediately jump up and intercept him before he reaches the table, you'd be correct. You would politely tell him that you are in a meeting but would love to catch up with him. You'd get his phone number and you'll tell him you'll call him soon. Oh, one more thing. Spies always carry cash. It makes it much easier to depart a restaurant in a hurry rather than wait for a check or have the waiter process a credit card. Plus, with a credit card, the server now knows your name. There have been a handful of occasions in my career that I had to drop a wad of cash on the table and hurry out of a restaurant for operational reasons. Never underestimate the power of a $100 bill. As I keep emphasizing, you must be quick on your feet as a spy. That doesn't mean, however, that you should jump haphazardly into situations that could put you, your asset, or your country at risk. You need a quick decision-making process to determine the best option to take, but not one that's based on shallow assumptions or oversimplification. This often can lead to snap judgments, which in turn can exacerbate the problem. An effective problem-solving principle is called Occam's razor, aka the law of parsimony. It goes, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. And my personal favorite, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. The concept is attributed to the 14th century friar and philosopher William of Ockham. It's called a razor because in scientific terms, a razor is heuristic. It's a self-learning method that helps you to save time. It serves as a mental shortcut for problem solving. Think of it as a mental math trick, like multiplying by 11. Now, if you don't know that, Google it. Even Albert Einstein referred to Occam's razor when describing his theory of relativity. The genius famously stated, everything should be kept as simple as possible, but not simpler. Therein lies an important point which is often missed. Many people hold Occam's razor as an undeniable truth rather than the probable truth. They become too simplistic when it comes to making important decisions about a problem or situation. They take shortcuts rather than applying logic or even common sense. Take the self-proclaimed flat earthers. Because these people see a flat horizon line, they think the world can't be round. Such poor judgment has persisted for millennia. Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher and mathematician, first calculated that our planet was round in 500 BC. Yet over 18 centuries later, when Christopher Columbus set sail west from Portugal, many people still feared that his trio of ships would fall off the edge of the earth. Such oversimplified thinking leads to sloppy decision-making with little thought to accountability, responsibility, or intended consequences, something especially true in geopolitics. In fact, there's a name for these type of lazy thinkers. It's called Occam's duct tape. Now, personally, I'm not an analytical thinker, but then I've never really bought into that whole left brain, right brain concept either. I try to avoid making mountains out of molehills whenever problems arise in my efforts as an entrepreneur. But I also recognize that actions have consequences. So I try to think things through and then apply common sense. The real trick to problem solving is to ask yourself, is this all there is, or could there be more? This brings me to my favorite part of the talk today. When asking the question, is that all there is? We must be very careful of the false dichotomy which states, what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind believes. For if we begin to believe that something must be the definitive truth because we saw it with our own two eyes, we must also ask, did someone deliberately set me up into seeing something that wasn't real? in order to get me to think that way. Now, I can hear you saying at home, wait a minute, time out. You just talked about flat earthers and the nonsense of conspiracy theories. Now you're telling us not to believe the evidence in front of our eyes. No, I'm not telling you not to believe your eyes. What I am telling you is to vet or verify the evidence presented to you and ask the question, could this be a setup? In short, I'm talking about one of the most interesting aspects of the world of espionage, and that is the practice of denial, deception, and misdirection. I'm basically talking about the art of magic. The marriage of magic and espionage should come as no surprise. When I was a young officer at CIA, one of the first training courses I took was called Denial and Deception. It was taught by a magician who would begin by showing us a magic trick. The trick usually involved some type of visual effect that concentrated on misdirection. It also focused on the use of sound to trick our ears. As students, you were amazed and entertained. The result of being astonished by a trick is known in the science world as frisson. This is similar to the quick hit of dopamine you get when you hit it big in a Las Vegas casino. That jolt of excitement from hitting 21 at the blackjack table or rolling a 7 at the craps table. But then the magician would do something unheard of. He would reveal how the trick was done. To our disappointment, the explanation of how the trick is done is never as exciting as the belief in real magic. This is also true of the world of espionage. Both magic and espionage rely heavily on secrecy and tricking others into believing something that isn't true. In fact, the CIA has a denial and deception section in its famous library. When I worked full-time at CIA headquarters, I tried to make it a point to spend at least 30 minutes each day, either early in the mornings or during my lunch break, visiting the extensive collection of original manuscripts from some of history's greatest magicians. Not only would these books describe the philosophy, engineering, and sleights or moves behind various tricks, but they would also provide recommendations for the magician's patter, the rehearsed dialogue or verbal setup. It should come as no surprise that a vital component of any illusion is the carefully crafted storyline or setup, as well as the precise verbiage needed to execute flawless directions for audience volunteers. One misspoken word can derail a trick as quickly as a revealed physical gimmick, such as a hidden wire. Not dissimilar, one wrong word during an intelligence operation, such as accidentally revealing intent or a source's real name, can easily blow months' worth of operational planning, or worse, could cost someone their life. The reason a magic trick works has less to do with some ingenious feat of engineering and more to do with exploiting the science of the brain. Much like a joke, a magic trick leads you down a structured narrative only to shock you with an unexpected conclusion. Therefore, so many of us get that twinge of excitement when we hear the lines, "Want to see a magic trick?" or "Hey, you want to hear a joke?" We fully expect to hear or see a setup, only to be amused by an ending we didn't see coming. According to the excellent book, The Illusionist Brain, The Neuroscience of Magic, the authors remind us that the humans interpret or construct our own reality from the information that we receive around us through our brain. Our 5 senses collect external stimuli, but the picture is often incomplete. As a result, it's up to our brain to build a mental picture that develops its own mind's eye visuals, situational awareness, general conceptual understanding, and/or anticipated outcome. Take, for example, the famous Jastrow illusion. This geometric illusion was attributed to Joseph Jastrow in 1891. Jastrow, born in Warsaw, was the first doctor of psychology in the United States, and he founded the Department of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin. Figures A and B are identical. This can be confirmed by copying them onto a piece of paper and superimposing the 2 figures. Nevertheless, it's inevitable that we perceive them as different. The bottom one seems longer, probably because its longer edge appears next to the shorter edge on the top figure. When assessing their areas, we cannot help but consider the lengths of the lines that define them, and those differences influence our perceptions. In Jastrow's own words, we judge relatively even when we most desire to judge absolutely. Here's another similar example. These are known as the Shepherd tables. Believe it or not, these also are the exact same size. That's the power of illusion. And it's the way that our brain tricks us into believing something with our own eyes, which isn't always true. So, if we know that magic isn't necessarily real, why do we continue to believe? Why is it that the intelligence community is fond of studying the principles of this timeless craft and applying it to the modern-day geopolitical military operations? The short answer can be found in Sun Tzu's Manifesto on Military Strategy, The Art of War, when the ancient Chinese general writes, "All warfare is based on deception." The late Dr. Barton Whaley, one of the foremost experts on military deception, who the Deception Library at CIA headquarters is dedicated to, once described deception as distortion of perceived reality. Whaley, who took his doctorate from MIT on strategic deception, was the author of numerous books on the subject, one of his most sought-after works being Stratagem, Deception and Surprise in War. The insightful book provides a historical analysis of deception and surprise by outlining more than 100 real-world case studies. In addition to being one of the leading deception consultants to the White House and the Pentagon and numerous academic think tanks, Barton Whaley was also an avid magician. Not only was he a member of the prestigious International Brotherhood of Magicians, but he also wrote the Encyclopedic Dictionary of Magic, 1584 to 1988, proving once again the unique intersection between the world of intelligence and the world of magic. Whaley's process of deception is a 10-step process comprising of the following. Number 1, knowing the strategic goal. 2, determining the reaction you want from the target. 3, deciding what you want the enemy to perceive. 4, understanding which facts are hidden, meaning the truth, and what ideas are publicized, the falsehoods. 5, analyzing a pattern of concept to be obscured. 6, analyzing a pattern of concept to be publicized. 7, designating available means to perpetrate the deception. 8, passing the plan from the intelligence staff to the operations staff. 9, transmitting signals to target channels. And finally, number 10, making the target accept the deception. Whaley understood that these steps were equally effective, within reason, to both military adversaries as well as entertainment spectators. There is an interesting debate among scholars as to the proper use of denial, deception, and misdirection in war, or even in everyday geopolitical interactions between nations. While Sun Tzu tells us one good spy is worth 10,000 soldiers, Karl von Clausewitz, in his seminal book On War, describes deception in the following way. Plans and orders given merely as make-believe, false reports sent on purpose to the enemy, is usually of so little effect in the strategic field that is only resorted to in particular cases. To say that there is a disagreement between Sun Tzu and Clausewitz would be an understatement. However, despite the ethical examples that are supposedly displayed by the United States, NATO, and/or the members of the United Nations, there is still a reason why every nation on Earth has a foreign intelligence service. There is truth behind the saying that espionage, i.e. spying through denial, deception, and misdirection, is the world's second oldest profession. The final way to think like a spy that we'll discuss today involves an old sales technique called NWAM. I think Tony Robbins might have even come up with this one. Let's face it, a lot of espionage involves selling people on the idea to sell secrets against their government, their organization, or even their own family. So, using the Carver methodology as a framework, let's see how an intelligence officer can assess another human being for their perceived likelihood as a candidate to spy, or as it's referred to in espionage parlance, recruiting someone as an asset. As I mentioned at the top of my talk, Carver was traditionally used as a targeting tool against critical infrastructure. However, it is equally effective against people. We simply need to change the definitions of the Carver acronym. When assessing people, we can manipulate the letters in Carver as follows. Criticality is now defined as how badly do I need the information this person has. Accessibility, does this person have access to what I want? And note, Access could be the single most important word in the world of intelligence. You want to recruit people with access. Next, recoverability. If the relationship falls apart, can I safely recover? Vulnerability. What is this person's level of susceptibility? Effect. What would be the repercussions of recruiting this person? And finally, recognizability. Can I determine whether this person either holds secrets or is vulnerable? And how exactly do you know how vulnerable, thus susceptible to recruitment a person might be? This is where NOAM comes in. And I will define this using everyday business terms to make it a little bit more relatable. NOAM stands for the following. Needs. What does the prospective client absolutely require? Wants. What does the individual or company not necessarily need, but would like to have? Wounds. What pain is the potential client experiencing that I could relieve? Authority. Does the person I'm meeting with have the decision-making power to sign this deal? And money. Does this person have the necessary funds to pay for my products or services? As soon as an intelligence officer learns a person's NOAM, she becomes much more capable of closing the deal, i.e. recruiting the person as an asset. Of the 5 criteria, the most important is wounds. Just like in business, the more you can do to ease your client's pain, the greater your chances of winning new clients. So, have it given you a lot to process? It's obviously impossible to provide you with everything you could ever need to know about how to think like a spy, especially in such a short amount of time. But that wasn't my intention. My goal today was to demonstrate that thinking like a spy and possessing the Carver mindset is something that you must constantly develop over the course of your career, over the span of your life. It's comprised of your experiences, continuous learning opportunities, and not being afraid to look at a situation through a completely different lens. Oh, and if you're wondering how I answered the opening question about the foreign minister having a heart attack in the passenger seat of the car, my answer was to drive him to the hospital, park in the lot at a distance far enough from the emergency room door that my vehicle wouldn't be seen on camera. Now, remember that this scenario takes place in the developing world in the 1990s, so CCTV camera coverage, it wasn't all that prevalent. And then I would place the man on the ground. I'd get back in my vehicle, and from a distance, I'd inform anyone else in the vicinity that there was a man passed out on the ground in the back parking lot. I'd communicate in the local language so I wouldn't be identified as an American. If nobody else was around, I'd beat my horn at the emergency room attendants, point at the man, and then drive off. It wasn't the textbook answer, but then life never really has textbook answers. Every scenario is unique. That's why the phrase, "it depends," is commonly employed by intelligence officers. What would you have done differently? If you have a better solution, email me in the link below. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this abbreviated CARVERCON event. Stay tuned for a panel discussion of former intelligence officers who will give you their take on what it means to think like a spy. I'm Luke Bensey. Thank you for joining me. And remember, stay safe and vigilant.
Thank you for joining us for How to Think Like a Spy. This is the Spy versus Spy versus Spy panel discussion. Let's all take a journey into make-believe so you can be spies like us. I am M for today, but you may know me as Scuba or Dr. Gary. You ask, is the M for moderator or for the boss of the 00 agents? Yes. Like our agents, I mean panelists, I may have worked for some 3-letter agencies in the past and may know a thing or two about intelligence. I am currently an associate professor of instruction. I teach intelligence, including cyber intelligence, at the School of Information at USF, or is that my cover. For this segment of CARVERCON, we are going to do a little spy versus spy versus spy panel discussion with 3 awesome award-winning intelligence professionals. 00 Zip, aka Bob, 001, and number 6. In order to save time for this discussion, I won't read their full bios. Plus, I believe half their bios are classified and have been redacted. Instead, I'm going to let them tell you a little about themselves. Double O Zip, aka Bob, tell us who you are.
So I may or may not be Luke Bensi, the Managing Director of Security Management International. I may or may not have worked for the CIA's Office of Special Activities as well as the Counterterrorism Center, and also traveled to about 142 countries.
Oh, who's counting? Okay, welcome, Bob. So, 001, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I may or may not be Sarah Adams. It is a real name. I'm better known as Superbad, which is my call sign. I'm currently working at the Intelligence Systems Support Office that may or may not also be here in Tampa. I also come from the CIA, and currently I'm running a Ukraine coordination network where we bring together 50 different NGOs to help in humanitarian efforts there. And I also recently put out a book. It's an open source cold case investigation into the 2012 Benghazi attacks.
Awesome. And what is the name of that book?
Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy.
Awesome. Well, welcome, 001.
Thank you.
And how about you, number 6? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm General Ed Leacock. I've been in the intelligence profession for over 50 years, both in my civilian and military careers, sometimes at the same time because of my reserve affiliation and the National Guard. I have a pretty extensive background on multiple portfolios, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, narcotics, you name it. I've kind of been there and done that.
I bet you have the t-shirt too to
Yes.
prove it. So welcome again, number 6. There we have it. 3 seasoned intelligence professionals from 3 different backgrounds. How much will their answers align or differ in spy versus spy versus spy? Let the panel discussion begin. Question 1. What is your real name? Just kidding. You would probably say Mr. or Mrs. Church anyway. So, the standard operating procedure for this panel is I will ask you all the same question, and each of you have a few minutes to answer. Whoever is ready first can start. There are no timers, no buzzers, no gongs, but maybe some trapdoors. All right, so what rules have you incorporated in your professional intelligence career?
I'll take that on first, M. I would say in my 50 years of experience, there's like multiple rules, but some people might call them best practices. 3 that come to mind fairly quickly. One is called own the street. The other one, know your history. And the last one, get to know how to do business. Like own the street, you can't do it into operations. Just saying, I think, I believe, I have, a gut feeling, that does not work. You have to be very detailed in how you plan your operations. The other one is knowing your history. You have to be very involved with your operations, whether they're successful or failures. And key to that is understanding what those successes are and those failures are, so that when you plan future operations, you're better prepared for that as going on. And then finally, you kind of know your analysis. Don't ignore it. History has been replete with a number of different intelligence failures. But on reflection on each of those failures, the intel was in there somewhere. You just had to go and dig it out and basically say, connect the dots. So those are the kind of the rules, or I said, or even best practices that I've adapted in my career.
Yes, very solid advice, yes.
Yeah, and I think, what he touches on, that's kind of the career we all have, right? That's really important. I think one of the things that's always guided me is like sticking to like my integrity and my own values, right? We work in very difficult environments. We work in countries where maybe not everything is in line, with our values and the way we do things. And I think, you gotta stick to your integrity and do what you think is right. And I think that'll guide you and give you the best career you can have.
core values are very important, definitely.
Right. And I'll take a spin from a defensive perspective. Two rules that I always live by, particularly with intelligence, is you have to travel so much as part of your job. So something that I always adhered to was two rules of travel. Is number one, always assume that you were under some type of surveillance when you are traveling, and not to do something that would draw attention to you or embarrass you or embarrass your country. And number two is to sort of think and act as a counterintelligence officer would act, meaning that understand that there could be audio devices. The person coming up to have a conversation with you may have ulterior motives. Just to put the shields up a little bit when you're on travel.
No, excellent. So, how has being a trained intelligence professional changed your view of the world?
I mean, I think one of the things is I don't see the world in black and white. I only see it in gray. So every time I hear kind of anything, I think of the counterpoint. So I go ask other people what their opinions are. My friends are from every view you can imagine. They all have different opinions on things. And it's just the way I view things. I know, like, there's just not one way, or there's not one, we talk about facts, and someone's like, this is the fact. I'm like, well, maybe it's the fact to you because you live in this environment, but is that the fact to the person who lives 1,000 miles away in a different environment? And so I really spend a lot of time analyzing those type of things.
No, very true. Number six?
No, and I would sort of second that and say that, yes, the world is very gray, and I think that what you need to do is also, I always say, you need to sit down and break bread with people from these other countries. Sit at the table, get their perspective of what a normal situation, what we consider normal, perhaps in our country, may be abnormal somewhere else, and vice versa. And you only know that when you really sit down in a more intimate setting, like over a meal, and learn this over time.
Yes, very
and
true.
part of it's just also, like I said, there's always the gray left and right, but I looked at from a standpoint of different perspectives. I review intelligence reports almost on a daily basis, and you get to see the facts, as they like to call them, but then you see the open source reporting, and then you start saying, well, how is my government going to respond to this? How's other governments going to respond to that? And then somewhere in the middle, you start looking at the viewpoints from the left, the centrists, and to the right, and then you can have some sense of where the truth might lie in the middle somewhere. And that helps tremendously to just keep a sense of what's going on in the world.
Yes. So being open-minded, and just like anything, there's two sides to a story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth, so typically. All right, can you provide examples of things you do that most civilians would find odd? Mine would probably be not having Facebook. So.
Well, I'll say something that happens with me all the time, and my wife always points this out. If we go to a restaurant, I'm always looking. The host will say, "Oh, here's a table." No, I can't have that table. I need that one over there, and then I'll take a seat. My wife would be like, the ladies are supposed to seat facing out. So, I can't see the door, and all of these type of things. So there's little things like that you automatically do. Or if let's say you meet a stranger or somebody approaches you, you're automatically thinking, wait a minute, is this person trying to elicit me? Why is this person coming up and being friendly? And then vice versa, you have conversations with them and you start to say, this person has access to something, and you're starting to see, what would be a thing in the future that, maybe this person would be a good recruit or a good asset or something. So those type of things that I guess the everyday person doesn't even take into consideration are kind of the silly things that maybe a spouse or somebody would point out. What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, one silly thing is if anything is in a road anywhere, I swerve my car around it because I don't want to be an IED, right? And I still do it. So, I think that's a funny thing. Another thing is because we read through so many reports in the intelligence community, I speed read. But to where, at least in the old version of Twitter, I would read Twitter so fast, it would always block my account thinking I'm a computer. And it's like, no, I just read and move through things as quickly. And I realize a lot of people don't go through data as quick as I do. And it's just something I've learned.
Yeah, I would kind of conceptualize this a little bit from their comments. There's a saying that you don't have to be a little paranoid to be in the intelligence business, but it helps. In my world, in our world, the key is that every time somebody approaches you or something's a little offbeat or just doesn't seem right, we say, like I said, the hairs roll up on the back of your neck. You want, why is this happening, and what do I have to do to either mitigate it or get away from it as fast as possible?
Yeah. Well, touching on what 006 said here about driving, what's the other thing is going to a restaurant or a movie or something, backing your car in as opposed to pulling straight in so you can make a quick getaway if something goes down and you have to make a quick exit. Again, your spouse is, why are you backing it? We're going to the supermarket. We need to use the back of the car. Why are we backing in? Things like that.
Yes, I back in everywhere, so yeah, got to be ready. Do you ever catch yourself reverting back to your training unintentionally?
Absolutely. Like I said, just get into the car. You start mentally to start focusing your drive. Where I'm going, what routes I'm going to take, how fast do I get there, what obstacles could potentially be in the way. You get thinking about once I do arrive, how do I kind of debrief myself? So you see that as a kind of a built-in defense mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just become a part of us. It's kind of hard to say, oh, I pulled this from my background. Well, I live the way still every single day. And I was a targeter. So, anytime I meet someone, like I know everything about them in a week because I'm obsessed and I look on the computer. I've been house hunting recently. And I mean, my house hunting, you think I'm going in to capture somebody, right? Like I've got maps and graphs drawing distances like to the grocery store. I mean, it's just become our life. There's no separation, I think.
No, I think that's spot on. They're really at a certain point, you just blend and become that person, and that's just how you think, and you don't even realize that you're doing it. It just becomes a natural reaction, to say, oh, I just made a turn, that guy just turned with me. That guy 2 cars back also made a right turn. All right, let me make a left turn, see if he turns with me then. Just silly things like that, and it just kind of happens.
Yes, those skills become second nature, basically. Yeah. So do you find yourself reading between the lines when it comes to the media? I would say, of course, that's where the hidden messages are. So.
Well, I always tell people that the best place to read a newspaper, whether the Wall Street Journal or whatever paper you read, there's always that, usually on page 4 or page 5, that bottom right-hand corner where it'll have the international news, and it'll just be one paragraph, and it's something that doesn't make the everyday headlines, and I always find that to be the most, I don't want to say accurate, but the most interesting reading, but it never makes the main part because it doesn't sell. But it's usually an international, some kind of incident, event, something like that happened. That's what I always find is the most accurate. And then otherwise news, yeah, you have to read it sort of with a grain of salt because you realize what's the intention of the paper, if there's a political slant to it, anything like that, what are we really getting at. So you're always reading between the lines on things.
Yeah, I mean, my response is very similar. I just assume they're trying to influence me, so I don't even watch the news. I only read the news, but what I actually do is when an incident happens, let's just say something happened in France, right? Like the protests are going on. I'll go to like a French newspaper and take the article and translate it, and that's actually how I read the news. I find the closest report to the location, and then that's how I read news. So all day long I read news in Italian and French and Arabic. It doesn't matter to me. I just translate it all.
That's a great tip. Yeah.
I get the luxury of getting to read just about all the world's major newspapers every day. And it's basically just overall a big propaganda effort on each of these newspapers. You mentioned the opportunity where I had be a deputy commander at Joint Task Force Guantanamo. I interviewed with some of the biggest names and news medias in the world, and they all had their agenda based upon their questions. So you had to be on your A game to say, this is what you asked, this is my answer. And you have to be, because they're all looking for their Pulitzer Prize. Yes. So I said, that's helpful to understand where you go and how you answer.
Yeah, and don't buy that off the record. There's no off the record. There's no, you just don't even talk to them to begin with. That's it, yeah.
But yeah, definitely a lot of propaganda and censorship out there as well. So how has being an intelligence professional prepared you for life after government service? For example, in business, everyday situations, negotiations, reading a room, etc.
Well, I'd say for me, it's two things, because I went down a sort of an entrepreneur journey, after my Intel time, and for me it was great in a sense that our business is able to do international projects, and what I find is that there's a lot of people, at least in the United States, that they're very hesitant or tepid about going into a foreign country, particularly one that maybe is a developing world, or it's a country that has corruption problems, or it has security issues or something like that. My time and training in the Intel world helped me to be able to do business in these countries, because I understood what the business practices are, what the expectations are, things like that. So that's probably been the biggest, and 80% of our work is actually international. But then the other thing, which has been absolutely shocking to me, and I think it may become the biggest shock to everybody who goes into the world of intelligence, and I've actually made this joke before, is that you go in thinking you're going to be James Bond and you end up Miss Moneypenny, because you're constantly you're reading, you're typing. So for me to when I worked to write 2,500 words or 5,000 words a day as part of your job becomes very natural. So you learn to become a natural writer. So I've put out 6-7 books already, just because writing becomes very second nature as part of your training. So it's been incredibly helpful. That I'm always grateful for everything I took from the intelligence community and was able to apply it in the private sector.
Okay, for me it was the initial effort was going into the intelligence business basically right out of high school. So spent 10 years on active duty, then went to the commercial world and stayed in the military. But what's key to that, it helped me both in the military and the civilian world, is that having worked with the intelligence community, Department of Defense organizations, the military intelligence organization, you get to learn the cultures and basically the lingo of how they speak. And basically, I've actually had a general officer say, Ed, you're kind of like a translator, because you can understand the multiple cultures, the languages, and you can help him, the general, understand what they were saying.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you learn is you can pretty much do anything. I mean, you might fail 10 times till you get to the finish line, but it gives you kind of the sense of confidence that you can take on something impossible, right? I've done evacuations from Afghanistan, from Ukraine. Obviously, my Benghazi investigation, when I found out I would have to identify 150 terrorists, right? I think anyone else would have backed away. And I might have cried the first day when I was like, I don't know if I can ever get that many. But now I have 95% of that number, right? But I knew I had the confidence to go do it, because the agency taught me, hey, one step at a time, you'll get there. Just keep working hard.
Yeah. Well, and to that point as well, I remember a phrase that one of our chiefs used to tell us when we were over in the war zones. He would say, hey, if not us, who? We're it. Nobody else is coming, guys. We are it. And you sort of learn that, okay, wow, well, we did some pretty cool, big stuff. And then when you go into the civilian world and it's just a regular job thing, you're like, it's a piece of cake, I mean, so you really learn that things are not that big of a deal sometimes after you get out, some of the things that you have to approach, because you've done when you look back at the time, that's your job. But when you look back and you're like, oh yeah, I guess that was pretty cool.
Let me add just one last thing, even out of all the intelligence reporting we're doing and operations, the key point is that you have to be right. Whatever you provide as an intelligence report or whatever you want to provide to our policymakers, it has to be right, because they're going to make decisions based upon what you have given them, whether they're going to just continue to monitor the situation, maybe demarche the organization or country, or drop a bomb on them. You've got to be right.
Yes. No, that's 100%.
Yeah, opinions, assumptions, that they don't want that. Just the facts.
Just the facts, ma'am. Yeah. All right. So what aspect of your training do you feel has helped you the most? Here in Tampa, definitely driving, but I know writing, as you mentioned with the books. What helped you the most?
I mean, I think one thing that helped me is just the ability to negotiate with persons who might not be on the same page as you, right? So even when I went to do my personal investigation, I had to go to Libyans, right, to help me. And I didn't realize that they had this view that, you know, the U.S. like had supported the attackers or been involved, right? So they were kind of like, why do you care? You guys wanted this to happen. You're involved in this. And so I kind of had to negotiate, like, no, I'm on the same side as you as this. And so it's like he had kind of said, it's almost breaking bread. It's getting to the personal level, because you actually realize you have a lot more in common with people than you think. And I learned this, you know, capturing terrorists of all things, when you sat down with them at a table and you kind of learned their backgrounds and you learned how they got to where they got to and why they think the way they do and their justifications of things. You're like, oh, wow, if I was in that situation, I might think the same way. And so just, it's kind of that negotiation of thought maybe that you're able to do well.
Yeah, and I think capturing what Luke said about his 142 countries, I've probably been in about 60 myself, but it helps understand that you get a broader perspective of the world, of how the world operates, thinks, and so that when you assess what intelligence report you're doing, it's not a bias, but you're helping try to frame it for your policymakers, saying this is what their perception is going to be. And that was some of my experiences being a military officer doing various exercises. I had to be basically the American commander's adversary. I played the role as an adversary, saying, this is how your adversary is going to think. From there, they would develop their own plans to help be successful. But understanding the dynamics, how people think, their cultures, and how they're just going to go through day-to-day business is key to getting your job done.
Yes, definitely red teaming, thinking like the enemy, so you know how to protect against that. So definitely great point.
And I would say the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. I mean, I think that, especially if we're talking about traveling to the places that we have to go, you know, it's not like you can go to the corner CVS or Walgreens to get some of these things. You have to think of in advance of what you're going to take with you, and what if something happens. I mean, I've been medevaced out of places before for sickness, and obviously in war zones with you know, the Benghazi disasters and things like that. But just like a quick example, when I was sort of coming up, one of the lessons learned that I got, or a tip, was when you check in a hotel, always get 2 beds. Sort of one of my mentors always would get 2 beds rather than a king bed. I said, what are you getting 2 beds for? And he goes, well, I was in the Middle East one time, and I was in my hotel room, and a bomb went off outside the hotel, and all the power was knocked out. And he said, I couldn't find a light. I was scrambling. I was tripping over things in my room. You know, there was people screaming downstairs. There was elevators out. I had to get down the stairs. So he said, since that day, I've always gotten 2 beds. On the other bed, I've got my clothes laid out. I've got the flashlight. I've got my go bag and all of these things. And stuff that even if you're going to a friendly, you know, European country, still doing these things, because you just never know anymore. So that whole concept of just being prepared, nobody's coming to help you, you have to do it yourself, that's probably the biggest takeaway that I think I've picked up over the years from all of this.
Yep, great point. Since we are not on a college campus, obviously, what advice do you have for students who are looking to go into the field of intelligence? Now, I would say do not do drugs, and be careful with social media, because you have to think ahead whenever you're going for your clearance. Any other recommendations for students?
Go ahead.
Well, I think you said the magic word, clearance. If you're going to go into this field of work, you're going to have to get a security clearance, which means you're going to have to pass all the background investigations and all of that. So you have to have a clean background. You have to be able to, you know, have a clean record, but you still want somebody who has traveled. So you still want someone who has been around and understands other cultures. You don't want to take someone who's never had a passport before and hire them as an intelligence officer. You know, you want them to have a little bit of background. But that's usually the advice that I would give to young people, is just Anthony Bourdain on his old travel shows used to always have a thing saying, you know, even if you're an 18-year-old kid, find any way to get on a train, get out there, sleep on floors if you have to. Don't eat at the Hard Rock cafes. Go eat some street food. Go meet regular people. I mean, that's really what it takes for young people to understand and to go down this road, but don't do something don't associate with some people who are going to hurt you for the background clearance at the same time.
That goes back to my rule number 1, know the streets.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for most of the last decade, I've been volunteering with an organization called Modern Guild. And so what I do is I basically help mentor high school and college students who want to go into a vast number of careers. I just talk to them about the intelligence community. The interesting thing is I've noticed is when they sit down kind of in a round table with me, most of the people in the room had not thought of it. They just saw my name and CIA and are like, this is cool. But they didn't ever put the research or time in to understand all the jobs in the intelligence community, all the amazing organizations you can work in the community. And so that's something I try to explain to them. Hey, do your research. There's a lot of great stuff you can get involved in. And I'll have people like, oh no, my degree's finance or my degree's X, and I can't get in. I'm like, oh no, we hired people to do X, Y, and Z. So it's educating them on that. And then one thing I do mentor all students on to help them in their application process is cultural immersion. We're not just saying a study abroad, but like go volunteer, right? The next earthquake. I mean, those type of things, that I see loves people like that they know we can drop you into a difficult situation and you'll get the job done and you can help others.
Yeah, there's basically something for everyone in the intelligence field. So,
My thought for the students that are going to get into the intelligence profession, something I've done for over 50 years is never stop learning. The reason I say that, when I first saw my first top secret document in 1972, I said, this is a great profession. I'm going to stick with this. But I made a vow to myself, said, look, try to learn at least one thing every day. And I can tell you the truth, for over 50 years, I have not been disappointed. It helps you be a bit more rounded intelligence professional because there's nothing and there's no one knows everything. But if you take the time and energy to learn all those things about all the intelligence disciplines, all the intelligence agencies, you become a lot better professional and better help this country in the long run.
exactly. And I'll pay you later for making that comment. So continuing education, lifelong learner, definitely. Okay, what's the best advice you ever received or best lesson learned during your Intel careers? Like mine was, do not assume, because it makes an arse out of you and me. So,
I mean, I think mine is simple like that as well. It's just because something's classified doesn't mean it's correct, right? The problem we have in the intelligence community is people stay in offices all day and they reclassify stuff all day and they don't actually know what's going on in the world. I mean, the really interesting thing is I had called over one day, the day, there was a strike that killed the head of the Wagner Group. He was a private military contractor from Russia, and I actually called one of the J2 shops because my friend was working in there. I'm like, hey, did you just see his plane went down? And he's yelling in the office, and they're like, we have nothing on it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna email you guys an article, but they're sitting in an intelligence shop in the US government with every tool in the world, and they don't know, right? And like, I'm telling them on the phone, so it's a problem. Classified spaces just get a little too group thinking, maybe. Yes.
Go ahead, Luke.
So, best piece of advice I hands down ever got it was my first or second year. I had a guy, Mike, was an old bomb tech. He'd been around the world, probably more than 142 countries. And best piece of advice he ever said to me, and I tell it to all of our students and interns and everybody, he said, hey, if ever the boss says, I need a volunteer, he says, don't even let him finish the sentence, throw your hand in the air. He says 9 times out of 10, it's gonna turn out to be some kind of assignment that will just be kick-ass. It'll be on your resume, you'll love it, you'll be telling stories about it. Now, that other one time, it's gonna be the absolute worst and you're gonna hate it, and you're like, why did I fall for that? But 9 times out of 10, just throw your hand in the air, I'll take the assignment, and it'll pay off for you.
And I'd follow a little bit on what Luke was talking about, is that the assignment's going to come up. And what Sarah said, take it on. It may not be the thing that you wanted to do, but you'll grow exponentially about how your career will move along, because once those people see on your resume, you took the hard jobs, you did the tough assignments, you did a good job or a great job, and they say, that's the kind of person we want to have in our organization. That is the key there. And following along my other thing about never stop learning. I remember I was a private and I kept asking questions to this one senior NCO. And he says, Ed, stop asking me questions. Go learn it yourself. I took off and I said, not bad enough that it takes me from private to Major General. So I can't fault him for it.
Exactly. I know when I joined the Air Force, they were like, do not volunteer for anything. Do not. But as it turned out, I volunteered, and those did turn out to be the best assignments, best deployments, best fun you can have. So thank you, panelists, for a great discussion. This concludes this segment of Spy versus Spy versus Spy and CARVERCON. Watch your inbox for a coded email for our next event. And of course, they self-destruct after reading. Thank you, and be sure to join us next time.
Now that your training's complete, best of luck to you on your future missions. Stay safe and vigilant, my friends.